Hey everyone, Anders Sundquist here, host of the podcast Lean In, and I'm super excited to be chatting with Rob Anderson today alongside my co-host Jenn Goodfriend. I'll let you all introduce yourself, and I wanted to say thanks for tuning in today on the 17th episode of our show, and grateful to be building a little community here in the TA and people space. So Jenn, I'll pass it to you, introduce yourself, and then off to Rob to unpack our topic today, internal mobility for talent teams.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Anders. I am really excited about this topic. It's one that I hear a lot, especially recently, from leaders in the people space. And so, super relevant. I'm Jed Goodfriend. For those that don't know me, I lead a business unit here at Job Mobs. And Rob and I met pretty organically at a conference recently. And this has been just something that happened, in our conversation. So excited for this chat.
Awesome. I guess that's over to me. One, thank you for having me, Anders, Jen. Yes, I'm Rob, currently lead talent acquisition at Earnest. I've been there for about the last 3 months, been in the TA space for about the last decade, based out of San Diego. And as the two of you know, and most people probably know me, in case you're wondering why is this person wearing a beanie, every Friday is blazer, beanie, burrito. I've already eaten my burrito for this morning, so you won't have to watch that happen. But, you got to show up. You got to show up your authentic self.
If you're in San Diego, Rob, we need to hear from you. What are some favorite burrito places? If you didn't know, I'm new to the San Diego area, so this is important information to me. Rob, where should we grab a California burrito?
Ooh, California burrito, I would say Juanita's, which is just outside of Encinitas in Lucadia. El Pueblo is a decent spot too. If you're more of a taco person, specifically, I would say the shrimp and Mexicali from City Tacos, carne from the taco shop, and the spicy dorado from Fish Shop.
Add to list. Awesome. I got to make it out to the coast. I'm here a little east called Poway, but grateful to be in sunny San Diego to say the least. So, Rob, let's jump right into a little background, a little context for our listeners. Tell us, so how did you get into TA, and give us kind of the high level of how you got to your current role?
Yeah, most of it. I got into TA probably how most people did. Of like, I had no idea what recruiting in TA was. It was a bunch of my college soccer friends were working for Aerotech, an agency, and they're like, "Hey, we think you'd be good at this. Like, you like talking to people." I was like, "Cool." I still remember my first day in Aerotech, like not knowing what a recruiter was, and they were like, "Hey, you need 5 hires by Friday," and I'm like,
Yeah,
"So sure, throw me in the fire. I'll figure it
that
out."
sounds like my first week at Aerotech. Here's a phone, start calling.
Which was crazy, but honestly learned a lot. I think most people understand that too, of like what you learned in the agency space, like is phenomenal experience. Um, but yeah, I'll give a quick overview of maybe companies I've worked at, high level of like what the priorities were, and then how I got today, or how I got here today. So after agency life, moved over to Barracuda Networks. A company was already pretty large at the time, about 1,000. Grew to about 2,000. My probably main focus and learning there was building out an international team. I had never done it. I remember showing up like in London, talking about how to hire folks across Europe, and I'm like, I have never done this before. But I think a lot of what I learned in that time is like curiosity and data. You have to test everything that's being told to you because you have no idea if it is true or false. An example is I remember everyone telling me that hiring in EMEA is only done through agencies, and we didn't need a recruiting team there. And I was like, that's interesting. But if you fact check it I was literally just in a lunchroom and I just asked everyone like how they found a job here.
Yeah.
And it was normally like referrals or applied. And then you actually look at the data and that wasn't the case. So there were a lot of these scenarios, but that was probably one big learning there. And then from there moved over to Quora, which was a huge, big fan of, still a fan of today, over to the consumer internet space. Smaller company, I would say very intentional growth. Probably grew from, it was 100 when I started, almost like 75% of the company was all tech. So like Inge data science,
Right.
extremely high bar, very, very high bar. So I'd say the focus there and learning was like, how do we keep the bar here while still making hires? Like lowering was not an option at all. And there was even acceptance here of just like, we know we're going to have a 20% offer acceptance rate. Like that was the norm. Everyone was okay with it, but you still need to hire folks.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of interesting learnings there, especially in internal mobility, which we can chat about. And then from there, moved over to health tech. So Alto. Alto was your, I'll say, more typical like 0 to 1. Hey, we found product market fit. I was hire number like 75, recruiting hire number 1, and it was go hire 1,000 people. So a lot of interesting learnings there because it's very diverse of how you're hiring, from like engineering to product operations to an actual pharmacy and couriers.
Yeah.
So I think the highest we got was maybe 1,000, maybe 1,500 or so. Recruiting team got to about like 40-ish.
Yeah.
And then after also continued on this health tech journey in color, recruiting team was pretty large when I started, about 65. Company grew from maybe, what were we? Let's say 300 to about 1,500-ish or so. And a lot of that expansion was doubling down on genomics, which we were known for. And then also, as we know, in 2020 and those few years was focused on supporting COVID testing.
Right.
Cancer research. And then, last 3 months, been at Earnest, which has been phenomenal. I know it's been 3 months because I just got my 90-day reminder in Workday.
Congrats.
Yes. And company right now is about 250, between 300-ish. I'd say intentional growth, which has been great. And here we are. So there we go. You just got the last 10, 12 years of my life. And I said 2 minutes, I probably went over.
That was perfect, Rob. The high level, the 4 minute snapshot of how you got here, and similar roots. I started at Aerotech as well, and I certainly didn't major in recruiting. But here we are talking about internal mobility. And I think first it would be helpful for our listeners today to define it before Jen and I have some questions unpacking the mechanics of internal mobility and actually, how does one build that program internally?
Yeah.
But let's define it first. What does that mean to you?
Well, Webster's dictionary on page 900 says, when I think about internal mobility, I don't know if I have a definition, but I think about any type of movement
Sure.
for employees within a company. That could be a promotion. It could be a lateral move. It could be a move to a different department. Any type of transfers I just see of movement within the company. So that would be like my most generic high level answer. And I'll also call it too, it doesn't have to be something permanent. It could be something short term, but any type of movement within team, outside of team.
So it really can mean a temporary, like almost like a project internally, say loaning a resource. I know
Yeah.
we even do that, in the agency world or third party. We'll see people be borrowed left and right. It's like if there's a big project, then it's all hands on deck. Jen, I'm sure that, you've seen this across your career, even on the agency side. What comes to mind for you, Jen?
I mean, yeah, there's as low key as like who's got bandwidth, raise your hand, and then folks move over. I can give you 20% at this many hours a week, and then I think there are more formal programs that are internal mobility based, and I think that's what a lot of people leaders and TA leaders are looking to understand right now, especially through the lens of some of the rifts that have happened and are continuing to happen. Internal mobility has just had a spotlight on it, and it's almost more important than ever to be really aware of the capabilities of your team, not just in what they're doing right now, but what's possible. So I don't know, Rob, like, can you just elaborate on why internal mobility is so important and how it can be helpful?
Yeah, there's the like message of what is the importance, or maybe just like philosophically. Like I think it does a lot of things. Like one primarily just like foster this commitment to growth, right? To the employees of like your development is important, whether it is expanding on a skill set, whether it's changing particular roles, but growth in particular. There's this second piece too of just I think it's great for I'll call it talent utilization. Like there are so many skills within like your company that you probably there's no way to track it. I don't know, maybe you could do your best job of like Anders, what are your top 30 skills? Jen, what are your top 30 skills? And then we're going to have this massive database,
Scorecards.
so yes, like scorecards. There are skills that are relevant to your job. There are skills probably that are transferable, and skills that you're great at that you're not even using in your current role that could be a great benefit somewhere else.
Yeah.
So I think there's that. I also think on the piece of growth, it's great for retention. right? Of people want to make pivots in their career, or they want to make sure that they're continuing to learn new skills. So I think that's the other piece. And maybe this is like a separate side note, but I think what's something that's extremely important when you're thinking about this is like it has to be a sound and like fair process. I call that out because a lot of times you'll see internal mobility will actually just mean there's like two people that somehow got moved to a job and nobody knows how they did it. It's like Anders is moving into a product management position and everyone else is wondering of like, whoa, hold up, I would have been interested in something.
Yeah, wait,
Why didn't I get
where
a
was
chance?
my opportunity? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's extremely important because we do a great job in the TA space of like defining a process
Yeah.
for internal mobility, which is pretty easy to do. And I recommend everyone, I'm like, if you don't have this, put it together. Also, don't spend too much time on it. Like, if you're in the sweet spot of like, I don't know, 200 to 500 employees, you can probably put together some guidelines in like less than a week for sure. Where I think something stands out and where the focus truly should be is like your actual program. A process is just steps to take to evaluate someone.
Okay.
But if you want a true internal mobility, like process or program, there has to be a need, and you have to think of like how you're going to serve that versus just here are steps 1 through 5 of how you can interview for a role.
Sure.
So a little bit of a ramble, but
Well, no, so I think that's good. Let's actually unpack that more, the program. For our listeners today that are maybe looking back at an opportunity they had and they wish there was an internal mobility program, maybe to preserve the TA team, right? And loan them out to CX or sales to then come back during a sprint that they thought was coming, and maybe it is coming next quarter. And rather than lay off those folks with all that institutional knowledge, right? Be able to loan them or embrace or build an internal, mobility program. So I guess like walk us through the steps of when you've done that before, Rob.
Yeah, so that's a really good example, and I think it's relevant to the past like couple years. So I'll talk about one specifically of the first piece that I mentioned of like identifying what the need is in the space. In this case of like, hey, there are a bunch of layoffs that have happened. Probably headcount has paused. You know you're going to hire at some point, but there's this 1 month lull where there's a lot of planning going on. And what are we doing in the TA space? And as recruiters, we're just like waiting. You're not really making any impact there, right? You're like, also, what's going to happen? So it's extremely important, especially as a TA leader. This is something where you have to drive and be proactive about.
Yeah.
So I'll give an example of this. Like we did this at Color. I didn't come up with this name, but we called it like bungee projects.
Okay.
Like, hey, you are stretching into some other function or job, and then you are going to come back and we'll start recruiting again. Cool
That's
name.
cute.
And,
I like it.
I didn't come up with it. If they're listening, I believe it was La. She's the one that came up with it. But yes,
shout out La for the name Bungie. So I like that.
But what's important here is a bad example would be, hey, I come to you, Anders or Jen, and be like, we have some additional capacity for the next month. Like, let us know if we can help. You're busy. You're going to be like, okay, cool. Like, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah.
Also, your follow-up question is also going to be like, maybe we went through a bunch of layoffs. Like, if your team isn't working, like, why wasn't your team like laid off? Something like that. So it's important to lead with the message of just like the why of like, hey, this is how we've reshaped the team. These are our priorities. We're currently going through headcount planning over the next month. So we have whatever it is, 4-6 weeks of time where we can stretch and support other areas.
Yeah.
That's explaining the just like why we're doing this thing, and then present options of where you think the team could make impact. Don't just say we can help. It'll be like when you ask someone how they're doing and everyone's just like, good. Like, it's just your normal response. Like, I don't really have time to think about this.
Yeah.
So think about the skills of your team and where you can make impact for recruiting. The thing that we realize is like, we are stalkers and researchers by trade. So there was a particular time of when we were exploring new avenues, like product-wise, customer service-wise. And I'm like, we can do an entire talent map of who should be our next set of customers, who our competitors are, a competitor analysis. Lead with these type of projects and who could run those when you're thinking about like ways for the team to support.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, I think another example or something comes to mind. I was talking with a friend, a customer, a TA leader in the tech space, and internal mobility was something that was happening in their organization. They're a little larger, a public company, a few thousand employees, and there's these clear pillars in recruiting. and there's not an internal mobility program. And here's what's happening is sort of internal mobility without permission. Here's what I mean. So there's go to market recruiting, corporate recruiting, tech recruiting, and maybe it's slower in, say, corporate recruiting or one of these areas, and those recruiters are being borrowed maybe without permission into an area that's having a sprint, and it's throwing off, right, the numbers, right? It's throwing off the ability to hit the goals that they have, the head count in each of those divisions. And so it's like, well, how do we cover that capacity, and how do we have a more well-defined program? I think that touches on the need for processes.
Yep.
So there could be a program and a philosophy of, oh, it's slow in one area, let's borrow resources. But if there's not processes under the program, then things can break, right? And so it's like, how do you have that framework? How do you have those processes that allow resources to be used optimally, but also awareness and communication between the leaders, right?
Yeah. And I think something else is important too, of like, you need process, but also the balance of like, do we need process, or we just need to get it done and communicate it? Like, don't over engineer something.
Yeah.
Like, I'll go back to this example of like, you could come up with like this huge process and table for this should be 25% of your time, and Monday should be spent like blah, 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 blah. All we did was
by the hour.
why, like where we can make impact. And then it was just, if you need help, here are 5 to 7 areas I believe we can make impact. Submit this form. And it was just who you are, what the need was, what you think the deliverable should be, how much time it's going to take, and when you need it by. And that was all shared basically with execs and recruiting teams. So everybody knew what everyone was working on, and also what the deliverable was. Because you want to be making impact, but also as an individual, you want to have that meaning, like of, am I just doing this work just because I have time? Or like, is it truly supporting these larger company initiatives and priorities?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it makes me think, when I was a recruiter, one of the scariest times is when things are really slow and maybe I'm not doing a lot, right? It's like recruiters want that impact. They're often, looking or craving for more headcount, more hires to be made, or areas to have an impact in the organization. And I think a well-built internal mobility program lends them the opportunity to sometimes self-select. So coming back, Rob, to the areas that you saw impact in previous organizations, let's list all of them, or maybe come up for our listeners with other areas that we didn't talk about. One for me, I didn't hear you mention was sales. Have you ever seen recruiters pivot into a sales role in your organizations and be successful?
Yes, both ways. Meaning, like, we've had folks go into sales, and also folks from sales going into recruiting.
Yeah,
and I'll say like, hey, we preach internal mobility. We should be the drivers of it. Like, if you are creating roles, my personal belief, like, depending on what you're hiring for within recruiting, a lot of it is soft skills. Like, and if you have those things, like, okay, I can train you on the job of being a recruiter or sourcer. So always think about, maybe not if you're hiring somebody senior, but if it's going to be a mid-level or even junior level role, like, okay, you should also be the driver and a champion of internal mobility and like soliciting that out. I would say for the specific sales example, those have been more of like one-to-ones versus like, hey, a true program about it. It's like one opportunity. But I think there is a good example. Quora was one where it was a skills gap. And what I mean by that is, hey, we're hiring a bunch of machine learning engineers. Only so many of them exist. And we came to the realization of like, if we just keep doing what we're doing, like, we're not going to hit our hiring targets. There's not going to be just some random rock we're going to pick up and they'll be like, oh, there are all the engineers that we were looking for. Like, just send some campaigns and do some marketing and everyone's going to come to us. So you identify the need. And then another thing, the next step that I think is really important is like, find your ambassador.
Sure.
I guarantee you there's someone on the exec team who has seen a program like this work very, very well, or they came from some type of transition apprenticeship program and they see the value.
Yeah.
Like, build your team and have your ambassador before you come like with the proposal. That's extremely important. So anyways, for this scenario, there are a few things that we looked at. We know we need more machine learning engineers. Okay, cool. So if we're going to do some type of internal mobility program, what is the right number? If we want to hire 10 engineers, should we be hiring 10 people from like some type of internal mobility? Do we even have 10 people internally that can do this? do we have the capacity to train these people when
Sure.
they come on board? Like if they don't have this skill set, how is the team going to react to that? And what we came up with is that we could do 25% of our hiring through internal mobility, internally and externally. Now,
Oh,
what I
wow.
mean by that is we decided, I don't know the exact number, but we'll just use the number of like, we'll hire 2 engineers internally who will, for 6 months, be trained on machine learning. After the end of the 6 months, if
Yeah.
both sides agree this is great, they move directly into that role. If not, they still stay in their same position.
Sure.
So remember, you have to remember, it can't be something of like, hey, we'll give you this opportunity. If it doesn't go well, sorry, you're out of here. Like, no, that'd be a terrible experience. This person was obviously a great performer in their role.
Not a lot of psychological safety there. Yeah.
Right. So that's why, and that's really important to communicate.
Yeah.
And then the second piece was external, which we call the transition program, which we looked for folks, again, I'll generalize, core, we'll say engineering skills, same program, 6 months, train on ML, everything goes well, we hire you directly into that team. If we decide, hey, this isn't going to work out, we'll still have a position for you.
Wow.
So coming up and being intentional about the number is very important for both who the person is, for both like bandwidth for training. But that is, I'll say, an example of like skills gap, and don't just keep.
And being honest about that. I mean, what you just described is really transparent. It's not necessarily the path of least resistance, right? To have an internal mobility program. Like we're going to have to train, we're going to have to do some reskilling. And then at the end of 6 months, let's see where folks are at. And we need to make sure that the previous role is still available for them.
Yeah. And there's two things that I always mention as a recruiting leader of like, what you don't want to come off as is, oh, I'm making an excuse if we can't do this. I will lead every time with nobody wants to fill positions quicker and better than I do. Like it is literally my job and how I'm evaluated. So I lead with that. I'm like, I don't care how much you want this. Trust me, I want it more. So I'm like, I'm trying to come up with the best solution. And then the other piece here too, that normally why there's resistance is like, I don't want you to take my best person. Like, then what am I going to do? Get ahead of that and just be like, hey, I know you're probably concerned about now you're going to have this gap on your team of you have this high performer who's moved. I'll find you someone else. Like we will hire someone in tandem, or we can make sure that overlap. We can decide on when that date is, but be very clear and proactive about those two, because those are normally the, I'll say, the like initial resistance.
Well, Rob, your communication style, it sounds like it's been not only successful, and you've had a chance to practice this in a few organizations, but it's really based on clear, like authentic communication. It's helpful. I'm learning just as our conversation's happening right now. But curious, when has it not worked well? When has there been a fumble with internal mobility, or maybe rephrasing, like what's a core learning from a mistake? I know that past failures can lead to greater successes in the future. Like for our listeners here today, what's something maybe that you've tried or done with internal mobility where it was a fumble that you'd want to say, hey, don't do what I did?
Yeah, absolutely. Just don't wear beanies on Friday. That's
excellent point.
No, I think
burritos first.
Yes. Starting a morning off with a massive burrito of steak and fries is the best way. You will come out of it feeling great. You won't crash at all. I'd say one big learning is don't bite off more than you can chew. Be intentional about where you're going to like pilot this. Instead of being like, we're going to roll out this massive program to the entire company, like that's going to be pretty tough to manage and probably not the best approach. If your company is, doesn't matter, 200, 500, 1,000, like whatever it is. Pilot it or do it in a certain area where you see, again, the need. It could be, in this example, engineering. It could be, in the other example, recruiting, supporting sales and like go-to-market. But I would advise against just saying, hey, we're going to do this for the entire company. And if you're interested in these roles, please like apply.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, start with a small or manageable use case and then expand the program as it's successful rather than broad general strokes. Hey, we're doing this thing, and figure out how to do it. But giving
There you
people
have the ambassador,
a
right?
direction with an ambassador. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's
touche.
okay. Take my great, my rock stars and make sure that I get some more after they're
Yeah.
gone.
And it can even be like very like I'll give you another example of like we were doing a transition program, or it was an apprenticeship program, which very, very similar to any type of like internal mobility. And all we were doing was 2 hires. That was it.
Sure.
But
Well,
the reason why we did it is there was an appetite. The team and the leader exec at the time saw value in it.
yeah.
And I was like, sweet, like let's run with this. And then what happens? You start talking about your success, and people are like, oh, this was great. And we have this diversity of experience because not to bounce around, but it's something incredibly important. A lot of times you're thinking about diversity goals and you're like, oh, we think about gender, race, ethnicity, but you need diversity of thought.
Yeah.
And like a lot what's going to come to that is bringing people of entirely different backgrounds.
Yeah.
So you can start very small. And once people start seeing success, then they'll be like, oh, can we do this? Like, FOMO is a real thing.
Almost is a powerful thing. And that kind of brings us to the present day, 90-day benchmark. Congrats on 90 days at Earnest, Rob, here. Nice milestone as you're ramping. Tell us about the internal program goals in your current organization, whether the status of the program today or where you're going to bring the program in the future.
Yeah, it's absolutely perfect. It's been rated 100 out of 100 NPS score from everybody. Yeah, I've been here for 90 days. I'll tell you of like, and maybe this goes back to the learning aspect as well. So Earnest is a great example of we've done internal mobility and also like transition for I'll generalize and say for our like sales and support functions.
Sure.
There was already buy-in from the team and exec, which is phenomenal. Volume, we thought maybe would be relatively high. And what I mean by that for a brand new program is we wanted to do at least 50% of our hiring through that.
Oh, wow.
So we had a process, and you have 2 options here. You can be like, set expectations with whoever the hiring manager is and run with it. Or I would advise against that. The second option, which we did, is have a recruiter dedicated to it. You should give just as much support to your internal program as external. Now, sometimes that can be very difficult because you don't have headcount for it. In today's space and market, that should be a little bit easier with how like back and forth hiring has been. But I'll say we're wrapping up. I mean, the quarter in a week, everything has gone well. Like there are learnings that we have. But I'd say success comes from there was already buy-in from the exec and the team. And also just making the decision of we are going to have one recruiter support this all the way through. And you treat it as if it was any other position. And we were actually just laughing about it this morning. We're like, wow, what would have happened if we didn't make that call? Because so much. You'll learn a lot as you go through it. Like you think it's just going to be like a process issue or like who's going to share feedback with the employee? Is it the manager? Is it the recruiter? Like those are things you think are going to happen. And then it's like, oh, there are these 10 other things that I didn't even consider.
Yeah, of course, the hidden bottlenecks, the hidden break points in the program.
Yep.
So I'm curious, Rob. I want to shift gears now to the future. We've talked about the past. We just unpacked the present. If I give you a crystal ball right now,
thank you,
and you're going to look at the forecast of the next 12 months for tech and for talent, and then Jen, I'm coming for you next. Rob, what's the forecast say in your crystal ball?
In my crystal ball. What time of day is it in the future? 12. I might be sleeping. This is about to happen. Okay.
After that burrito, I think so.
After that burrito. So at a high level, you kind of have the two extremes. You have folks who are extremely more just like on the pessimistic side of like nothing's going to happen. The market's going to continue to be terrible. And you have more the optimist, which is like things are going to turn around and like we're doing tons of hiring. I'd say I'm more middle ground, still slightly leaning like we'll say pessimistic. And what I mean by that is like, I think companies will still continue to hire in areas that we've already seen. I think it'll be much more intentional. I think we've all had plenty of learnings over the past few years, and it's not going to be this go hire as many people as possible, which is also why I think internal mobility is so important right now.
Oh, yeah.
You have time now to think through these things and do them thoughtfully. So as leaders, I say this is my like caveat to everyone, or maybe takeaway of like be proactive about it. Find the need, find your ambassador, and start to develop a program.
Well said, Rob. Jen, what's your crystal ball say?
I prefer the tea leaves. Let's see.
Okay. You are a big fan of the tea. This is
No, yeah,
true.
I'm a tea drinker. I ask a lot of my clients this question, and I get very different answers, similar to what Rob said, right? Both sides of the coin. By 2025 we'll be full speed ahead, or I think Q4 we'll have a much bigger budget. Here's what I will say: the reason this topic is so relevant. It's not just you, Rob, that's bringing it up, and you have like a fire lit under you to talk about it. It's TA leaders want to get it right, and
Yeah.
these internal mobility programs, like, you made it sound so easy, but it can be really challenging, right? Everything from even reskilling your internal recruiters to be able to build those internal pools of talent versus going external, which is often kind of what recruiters are trained to do. And they want to, fill the role fast and, have the least resistance possible in the process. I would say because TA leaders are so focused on internal mobility right now, my hunch is that it's not going to be a massive hiring spree in the foreseeable future. I think, people are being really conscious about who they're hiring. And when in the past it was like, get me my machine learning experts as soon as possible, and they all need to sit in San Diego and I need them starting, tomorrow. Now it's like, find me the one person who's going to make the biggest impact within the org. Each hire, like, there's just so much more emphasis on the impact that hire is going to have versus the speed of hiring and the number of hires.
Yeah.
So it's been a little bit of a flip of a switch right now. But I will also say this, we work across all different industries from healthcare to tech and everything in between. Everyone is hiring, just not as publicly as it has been in past years. So certainly not doom and gloom.
Yeah, that is true. And you mentioned something that also made me think about something of what's important as you're trying to roll this out
Yeah.
or get buy-in or the process in general is you have to have your competencies and competency-based interviewing buttoned up. And the reason why I say it's important on the education side, I guarantee you, if you ask your exec team or CEO, whoever it is, like, oh, who are the people at the company that you just want to like replicate? I bet you it'll be competency, like soft skill based versus like a specific skill they have. So most people will say like, what are the things that you need? Of like, hey, we need this person who's going to be a like driver, or someone who has a very low ego, someone who, when they're faced with a problem, they're very, very clear about what they can do, the questions that they need to like move forward.
Yeah.
So most everybody has the same values at a company. It's like how to be a good person and like how to get shit done. Excuse me. But the thing that makes it more difficult is how do you evaluate for that?
Yeah.
And that's a lot what the interview process is around for internal mobility.
That's excellent. I think that's almost a ... maybe to our next episode, competency-based interviews. So segue there. Thanks, Rob. But in all seriousness, the words of wisdom were appreciated. Thanks, Rob, for dropping knowledge on us about internal mobility programs. Jen, thanks for co-hosting today. Everyone, thanks for tuning in to the Lean In podcast. Until the next episode, competency-based interviews coming your way.
Coming your way.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, y'all.